Thank you for joining us. On to our next panel. This panel will explore what investors and corporations are doing to mitigate climate change, reduce our carbon footprint, and minimize the impact on the environment. Joining the panel are Jens Rill, Head of Environmental Sustainability at Philip Morris International, Jean-Marc Champagne, the Head of Environmental Finance, Bankable Nature Solutions Asia, WWF Hong Kong, and Christina Tang, the founder of Blue Sky Energy Technology. Moderating the panel is Alexandra Tracy, the President at Hoiping Ventures. Alexandra, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cliff. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us, guys. I do appreciate that we have a bit of competition from the news trickling across the Pacific. So we really appreciate you bearing with us for the next 40 minutes. And it will be a good decision. This is going to be a great discussion. You've just heard about our three fantastic panelists. So basically an expert in sustainability, an entrepreneur and a clean tech expert, and then also an expert in green finance. So I think we're going to have a very wide-ranging and interesting conversation. So I'd like to kick off where we are today. I think maybe one of the few positive things that we can say about the coronavirus panic is the fact that emissions and pollutions have been reduced in certain parts of the world. So what does the panel think? Does this really present an opportunity for what some people call a great reset or building back better? Does this focus the mind on a greener way of running our economies? Jens, you've got up very early this morning in Europe to join us. Thank you. So let me come to you first.
Well, I think it's really an opportunity to think again about how we live, how we consume, where we live, how we move about, and I think it's really not. We shouldn't be distinguishing between growth or green. I think what we need is green growth, and I think we need to work further to really look into the options of changing the way we live better, take better care of the environment, and really just change the way we position ourselves in the society and what we want to do.
And how much do you think do governments have to drive that? Is it very much policy, regulation, top down, or are there other factors?
Well, look,
yeah.
Right. Look, regulation can set a level playing field, and there's a clear place for that. And we all have a role to play then. If we know the right direction, if we know where we want to go, and if there are some strong targets, like a number of governments have now taken strong targets to reduce CO2 emissions by 2050 and beyond, then we know where to go, and we have a role to play there as a company. As a corporate in the tobacco sector, we are aware of our impact, and we are committed to reduce and minimize our impact. So we do this in many areas. On carbon, for instance, we've set very strong climate targets, and I'll elaborate on that a little bit later. That really allows us then to plan, to strategize, to put in place programs, also clean energy programs that will really help us do our bit, do our part to contribute to reducing overall impacts for the environment, stave off the climate crisis, hopefully, and really take significant action in society.
Mm-hmm. Christina, let me come to you. I'm interested in what you've observed during this slightly peculiar period of these months. Some working from home, less travel, shopping online. Do you think we're going to see real behavioural change that's going to have a long-term impact on the environment, on the economy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, behavioral change is definitely seen in the past few months. no matter how much we have tried to push for technological adoptions or remote or digital learning, nothing has been the impact as fast as COVID-19. So I would say COVID-19 definitely has brought about very significant behavioral change. In terms of whether the change is positive or negative, I think that's debatable. For example, from the energy data that we've observed, the electricity usage in residential buildings have significantly increased. In some sites, more than 50% compared year on year. So yes, we're spending less time in the office, but actually the energy usage is transferred back to the workplace or the home place instead of workplace. And you can argue that in the workplace, there might be actually economies of scale, because when you turn on lights or AC, 100 people are sharing that facilities, versus at home, everyone will have to turn on their own individual appliances. And in the other areas of like food and disposable waste, because of a lot of takeaways, the amount of disposables that have been generated in the past few months have also been really quite tragic. But this is also the opportunity for us to invest in new habits of bringing our own, for example, reusable utensils and containers. So I think there needs to be not only reaction, but actually deliberate response for us to capture the positive behavioral change that we can see from COVID-19.
Thank you. So Jean-Marc, coming to you. For us in this region, I mean, there are challenges, there were already challenges to balance out environment and economic factors. Clearly, energy growth is rapid and will continue to be rapid. We have issues with deforestation and with particular industries that are very important for this part of the world, such as agriculture, fisheries. Do you have any thoughts about what particular challenges and how we have opportunities to do differently in this part of the world?
I didn't catch that last part. Your opportunities to do?
Just maybe to look at things slightly differently for our region.
Yeah, I think, the one thing I think we need to focus on globally, and in particular, I think in Asia, and I can say, being based in Hong Kong, we need to focus on the big thing we need to focus on is energy efficiency. Less so about building more capacity. Yes, capacity, we do need it. We do need to replace fossil fuel energy, but I think the elephant in the room to me is energy efficiency, and I think there's a lot of waste that goes on with that. So I think I'm not sure how if COVID necessarily or any particular events will change that type of thinking, but my view is that I think we because if we can conserve on energy, I think the need to build additional capacity will be a lot less. So I think that's where the focus, I think, should be. And I think, we should be making efforts in that space. You see a little bit of it, but not enough. Then I also think there should be time spent on, energy transition. So how do we get countries and even power producers off of straight fossil fuels, and how do we start moving them? Not gas can be a transition, but how do we get them to move more quickly to renewables? But I also think in that transition process, you have to also consider energy efficiency as well. So I think that to me, that's one of the biggest things in Asia that we need to focus on if we're looking at it from an Asia perspective. And then, looking at other things, you mentioned deforestation, and I mean, that comes down to, we just need to look at more sustainable methods of production. And we're working on that here at WWF with our, there's several ways to do it, but the way we're trying to change the dynamic is by bringing in what we call bankable nature solutions, which is focusing on trying to make conservation profitable or have a revenue stream. So we want to attract more money into conservation by doing that. So the only way I feel we're ever going to get more money into it is by moving away from the donor grant-based model from foundations and development banks, and then over into more profitability, where we can then say, hey, look, we can capture this money from the private sector and we can bring that into conservation. So I think with things like that, that's how we can start to move the needle in Asia and actually globally.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, so there was a lot in that. Let me come back to you on just one point, and then I will ask Christina. The energy transition point, I mean, one of the key issues there is, in fact, government policy. We still have huge fossil fuel subsidies in this part of the world. And I don't know if you have any thoughts about what kind of advocacy, whether it's a WWF type organization putting pressure, whether it's investors putting serious pressure on governments and also fossil fuel companies to accelerate that transition. What are maybe the most effective ways to try and address that? It's back to you.
Oh, that was, I thought you said Christina. Christina, okay. So I think, one of the big things I think is on you mentioned policy. I think I couldn't say, I guess when I was younger, I would say, regulation is not what we need, and it's up to the private sector. And in fact, I just did say the private sector is what we need for conservation. However, when it comes back to the area of, if we're looking at energy, I think regulation is something we need. We need that more than anything. So the problem is what we have here is the game, or if you want to call it the game, but it's rigged in favor of the old way of the old model. So that doesn't really. So the more you can try to do all this stuff, but if the setup is not right from the start, that's going to be an issue. So the regulations have to come in place, and that is the only way we're going to move really ahead on this. And so what I think has to happen there, and what we're sadly seeing maybe today, is that the electorate and the people and the public need to be aware of this, and they need to elect the right people who are going to make these changes and put regulations in place that will make it easier to form policy, then that will then make it easier to move into this transition that we need. So I think that's what we need, is an educated populace and understanding the real problems. And we need less obfuscation from companies that are trying to hang on to their interests, which is understandable, but we got to move them aside, because we need to move on, and we're fighting not only a climate change issue, but we're fighting biodiversity loss at a scale that's never been seen before. And if these things collapse, it's going to be a big problem for the world.
Let me ask Jens just to comment on that, because Europe is arguably a bit further down that path.
Yes, I fully agree with Jean-Marc. The good news is that the cost of clean electricity, of green energy, is coming down constantly over the past couple of years, and to the level that clean electricity, solar electricity, is now the cheapest energy available. You can look it up in the latest International Energy Agency report from last month, I just published. It's now becoming the most cost-effective energy. So I think that's going to be a game changer. So the regulation will be one factor. The other one will be just the cost, where companies are going to realize this is just the better option. In our case, we are investing in solar energy. We've set up more than 72,000 square meters of solar panels to date. And we are committed to make all our factories to source only green energy by 2025. So I think there's really going to be a game changer. So on one hand, the regulation, but the other hand, just the market forces will be driving that. So I'm quite confident this will be an important factor. It doesn't mean we should not do energy savings, for sure. We should still insulate buildings, get better processes and so on. But the two combined will really do a lot towards cleaning our electricity and cleaning our skies as well.
Yes, and let's come to Christina, obviously, on energy efficiency and how some of these new technologies can really move things forward. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. I really agree with Jean-Marc in build-up cities like in Hong Kong, Singapore, or Seoul, or all the major cities around the world. If we look at the single largest source of carbon emission, it will be the building energy usage. And no matter how much we try to catch up with renewable energy, the traction of renewable energy contribution to our overall energy usage remains to be extremely low. In Hong Kong, at a single digit, far low end of single digit. So how can we strike this balance? It's by reducing demand significantly. And the difficulty about building energy efficiency is once a building is built, it will be around for 30 years. So we cannot just look at new building design. We have to look at the existing building stock and find out ways to easily and rapidly retrofit them, improve their efficiency. And so what we've been really doing a lot and in advocating is to make sure that buildings have ongoing transparency of their energy usage and the indoor and environmental performance for the well-being of the occupants. So is the building being overcooled or too stuffy? To prevent the contagious risk of different diseases or virus. And at the same time, building also needs occupants to involve in greening the buildings collaboratively. Because one of the biggest difficulty of landlord is half of the building, more than half of the building floor areas is actually rented out to different tenants, be it commercial or residential. So educating, engaging occupants to actually understand and be aware of how to save energy by each kilowatt hour is significantly important, so that whenever there's big initiative by the building owner or the committees to improve and retrofit the building, they actually have support from the users to do so. And why is that important is when we look at the carbon footprint of a building, over its lifetime, 70% of the carbon footprint comes from its ongoing operations. The initial construction of the carbon emission embedded in the materials or the demolition of the building only accounts for 30%. So we need to make sure that the building is operated well. And how we do it is actually in terms of technological improvement, the availability and the performance of sensors, the cost of it have significantly come down. Very similar to what Jens have shared about solar panel costs coming down. The sensors cost and their performance have been increasingly, to a scale of even a household can adopt it. So if a household can adopt it, why not enterprise? Why not buildings? In coupling with hardware rapid improvement, the performance of real-time services over cloud by providing real-time notifications and alert by different analytics services, including using intelligent triggers. If abnormality situations is detected, occupants can be alerted real-time. Previously, it will take a troop of people to walk around the building in order to know all these information and alert like over 1,000 occupants. But right now, a machine can simply do that over uses a mobile phone. So the cost has significantly come down. The performance have been superb. We've seen over a 10% energy saving if owners are willing to adopt these kind of services. So I think it's really about muscling and having the determinations to take actions and put time and resources behind this.
Mm-hmm. So you're a relatively new business in, I suppose, a relatively new space. How have you found the reaction from the customers, from the businesses has been? I mean, in Hong Kong, people always criticize and say, no one's doing buildings and building retrofit is not happening. Is that your experience? What are the challenges in getting people to take up the products?
Mm-hmm. When we shared our ideas, building owners and occupants, all of them would say, yes, this is what we should do. I think the difficulty come into how do we make a new change from the current status quo. So this will mean putting new time, new resources behind this. So not only lip service, but actually having dedicated team member, full-time staff to drive this effort. And putting resources, putting in budget within a year's plan to invest in these sensors, to invest in these services. So I think the main gap is not in whether we're willing to do it, but how do we take it further beyond lip service, actually putting resources, actually putting your staff time in investing in these areas.
Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the issues that I always hear, of course, is that we don't have the budget or we don't have the access to finance for some of these kind of projects, which brings us to, I guess, the next big group of people in this conversation, which is investors and financial institutions. Jean-Marc, you talk to financial institutions all the time. I know this is asking you to generalize, but do you see real interest in investing in greener sectors? How much of it is spin? How much of it is real action?
Yeah, that's a great question, Alex. I would say that it's a two-part question or a two-part answer. One is, I think there is a lot of, I guess you want to say, a lot of spin from institutions saying we want to do this stuff, and whether they're really doing it or not is a different story. But with that said, I think they're moving along, and it's becoming less and less of spin, and they're actually starting to take this more seriously, because it's become something where it's no longer seen as necessarily as a philanthropic type venture. It's now being seen as something that is well, there's two things. It's being something that's seen that could be, if they don't address this, it's going to be a risk to them, to their books. And there's also, they see opportunities, and they're starting to see this as an actual investment. And they've actually, so when I mentioned just a little bit earlier, when we started up this initiative called Bankable Nature Solutions, we thought of this, but actually it was born out of the banks coming to us and the institutions coming to us saying, look, we aren't opposed to this stuff, but and I understand they're not philanthropies and they're not development banks. We're talking about commercial banks. So I get why they go the way they go, and why, even though they say good things and they haven't done a lot yet, but what they want to do is, how do we make this, how do we make things investable? And how do we make things that, they can not necessarily have to donate money, but how do they actually invest in? So they've come to us and said, how can you fill this gap? Because what we're seeing out there is, we want to get involved in these projects that conservationists keep talking about, but they're too small. The quality is not that great. So what can we do here? So basically what we've done is we said, okay, well, look, what we're trying to do is develop through what we call a landscape approach. We look at an entire area rather than just one particular project potential. So we map out where are the ecological pressure points in that landscape, whether it's in Southeast Asia or wherever. And then we look at who are the stakeholders that rely on nature for their business. So, and then at the same time, then we look at the investment side, who would be interested in investing in this. So we look at the landscape, and then we look at, okay, so here are projects that in this landscape that have what we call bankability potential, or potential to make profit. So we'll look at a particular project and say, okay, well, the project has to be bankable, it has to have conservation impact, that's actually number one, and then it has to be bankable or profitable, and then it has to be scalable. That's probably even more, one of the most important things if we want to attract the private sector. So we're looking at those kind of things. And so an example of what we're doing is we're looking in Vietnam at a particular project that looking at rice farming in the Mekong Delta in the province of Kamau. What you have there is a huge issue with land sinkage. So the land sinking, but sea levels rising. The current rice that they're producing is not suitable for higher saline type water. So we need to change the crops that they're growing with the rice, but we also recognize we need to supplement their income with not just rice. So what are we going to do? Because rice farming it's a seasonal thing, we're going to supplement the off seasons with aquaculture or fish or shrimp farming. So in those seasons when there's no rice, they'll have supplemental income with the aquaculture. So that is how we get more bankability into the project. But also the conservation impact comes from the irrigation process. So when we're trying to, when the land gets irrigated and flooded, that also builds up sediment to help build the land back up from the sinking problem. So that's our conservation impact. And then it's absolutely scalable. So those are the kind of things we're looking at. And the banks won't come in at early stage. We're coming in at the early stage. We get the development banks involved at the next stage, and we build this up as a process. So we come in with incubation, origination capital, the development banks get involved. And then once it gets scaled up enough and de-risked, then that's where we get the private sector capital to come in. So I think that's where the banks will move from platitudes and saying all good things that they want to do to actually taking action. I think once we get that as more mainstream, that's when we'll see this happen.
And do you see, just a quick follow-up, we hear all these great pledges from the big international banks. We hear a lot less from the national, local, regional commercial banks, which frankly is where most of the money is. Are you seeing interest and capability from those kind of players, or is it mostly the international ones?
That's a superb question, Alex. And I was just talking that with my wife actually yesterday. Just we got on a random conversation that actually led to this, and the answer is, outside of maybe Singapore, I'm not seeing much from local action in the region. And it's yeah, in Hong Kong, there's not that many Hong Kong originated financial institutions here left anymore. A lot of them all bought out. But you're not seeing that. It tends to be a European driven agenda, even more so. You're not seeing much out of the US either, frankly. I mean, you see some of it, but really where I think the action is and where people and banks are starting to make real effort is coming from Europe, and it's less so in Asia and less so in North America. But I think if people catch up to where Europe is, then it will be less of talk and more of action. But again, I think the whole sector needs to improve. But it also, as they start recognizing, because the one thing to point out, I know we're getting close on time and I don't want to take up too much time, but one thing to point out is that finance is the facilitator, and it will go anywhere you want it to go. So if you want to direct it, keep going towards oil and all, and whatever, it'll keep going there. But if the economy and the system starts changing to be more green, finance will go that way naturally. So the banks will naturally be on board, and they may start leading because they'll recognize the opportunities.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So let's come to Jens. You're in Europe. You interact with banks. You interact with shareholders, and you're in arguably controversial industry, the tobacco industry. Just agriculture. It's associated with deforestation, possibly with carbon emissions, with air quality issues. How do you interact with those stakeholders, and how do you make them comfortable about where you are and how you're transitioning?
Right. Maybe just a quick follow-up on what Jean-Marc said. I mean, we do see a very clear interest from the investor community in the form of the questionnaires, the rankings that they publish annually, like the CDP, formerly known as Carbon Disclosure Project. There's a CDP on climate. We participate in that. It's a very comprehensive approach, and that also helps us to improve because we see all the little details that are behind the climate work and what's relevant to investors. And we are ranked on the A level on the CDP climate. The same for water security. So we really see this strong interest for that. Now, in terms of overall how to interact with stakeholders, look, we have a materiality approach that we have carried out, and online you're welcome to look at our materiality report. Also look at our sustainability report where we describe in detail who our stakeholders are and their relevance and how we look and consider their needs, their requirements, and how we respond to them by setting our priority actions and priority topics where we do launch far-ranging programs. So just to name a few, I've mentioned already the ones on energy and clean energy. There's also water, where we are committed to water stewardship. We are a member of the AWS, Alliance for Water Stewardship, and we are certifying our factories. We've got 6 certified already, with a target to have all of them certified by 2025. So this is really about not only how much water we use, and we are saving water across our factories, but it's also how sustainably we use the water within the broader watershed, right? Because we never operate in isolation. We always operate within a community and a context. That we do work on waste by sorting the waste, and we have commitments to have zero waste to landfill, for instance, in Indonesia. And we also integrate green design principles for our new products, because we understand a little bit like buildings, much of the impacts are set in the planning stage and the design stage. So this is also where we need to improve over the long term. So I think it's really about having this broad approach, and we mentioned the deforestation as well. So we have strong programs in place to ensure the traceability of the wood that is needed to cure the tobacco, to make sure that it doesn't come from areas with deforestation, or that it comes from sustainably managed forests. So these are all programs that are very important. It's particularly critical to have a holistic view and to make sure that we integrate all these factors. So that's what we do. You know, we do much more than I have time to discuss here, but we also want to be transparent about that. So anyone is more than welcome to look at our sustainability report or to contact us for any question.
Thank you. I think we're just coming towards the end of our session. So let me, if I could just ask each of you to finish up with a very quick question. Given where we are, if there's just one thing, could be a big thing, could be a small thing, that you would like to see change, that you think would really impact on our ability to make sure that we maintain blue skies, low emissions, strong environment for the future, what would that one thing be? Let me ask Christina first.
Sure, I want to make it as practical and easy to take action as possible. It's to reduce our aircon use, and to do that, you know, install electricity fan, use natural ventilation if your windows are openable, and be sure to really track your energy usage, because that is the single largest source of energy emission in Hong Kong.
Okay, great. Jean-Marc?
Yeah, I think that's a tough one. I'm going to start with regulation. I mean, we have to have regulation in place that's going to tighten everything up. It's not going to happen on an individual level. It's great to do collectively, you know, as individuals, and we can, but without really, people naturally, and I get it because I do it too, people naturally want to do the thing that's easy. But if we don't clamp down on everything, you know, in this case, we're talking about energy. If we don't put proper energy regulation in place, things won't happen. So I think things need to start at the top, and governments need to take action.
Okay, and final word from Jens.
The way I see it, I think one of the most impactful measures would be to internalize the cost of carbon in our balance sheets of companies and of governments, because that way we will really understand where the issues are, and we will you know, need to show the impact, and that will allow the right decisions to be made. That will allow the market then to move in the right direction by really making sure that the true cost of the use of energy, of the pollution that's generated, is actually coming on the balance sheets, and it has to do with the responsibility then of companies, of governments, you know, to really address that aspect and improve the balance sheets, and then by default it's a market forces that are going to help us get on the right track. I mean, for PMI, for instance, we have introduced an internal price of carbon just for this matter, so that we really understand where the issues are, and then what kind of projects to do that are most efficient at reducing our carbon impacts.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. I think that the audience may have some tricky questions for you. So over to Cliff.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. Thank you, panelists. Yes, well, we have a question directed to Jens. This is from Ryan Wong. How do we address the various limitations of renewable energy in actual operations? What is your solution to enhancing environmental sustainability? So we've talked already about renewable energy, but how do we get over the limitations in certain operations?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is a technical question and a financial question, isn't it? And there are different ways energy is being used. So, of course, the first thing is always to seek to reduce the use of energy, you know, and we've heard that. It's clear that the megawatts, the watts that don't need to be spent, don't need to be sourced, don't need to be produced. That's the first one. And then I'm quite confident that with the prices of energy coming down, you know, hopefully at some stage with the subsidies for fossil fuels to also come down, then the economics of that will become more and more apparent, and more of a desirable option and a choice for companies and others to take. But it's true that it's depending on infrastructure, it's depending on a number of things, and infrastructure lasts for a long time, and it's linked to investment. So there's also a case for and as we said, if there's a big target, a national target or an international target that helps all the invested parties or the interested parties then to work towards finding a solution. But it's not an easy fix. I think we are all clear on that one.
Okay, Christina, Jean-Marc, would you like to add?
Christina, you want to go ahead? I don't have any particular comments on that. I think Jen's covered it quite well.
Yeah, I think Jen's covered it really well. I think one quick thing to add is no one solution is going to solve all the problems. So renewable is part of the solution to solve the supply side. So I think we need a two-pronged approach to look at both supply and demand. So as you increase green supply and you reduce demand, then you can have a chance to hit net zero carbon or even negative carbon buildings.
Thank you. We have another question. This is from Elena Jiang. What are the most important factors to consider in property development with regards to sustainability? Christina, would you like to kick off?
Yeah, sure. My 2 cents is there has been a lot of good development across green building certifications in the property development sector, and that's a great starting point. But I think the danger or the risk of that is with any point or certification system, it will come with tricks. As the industry develop more and more sophistication, people will find ways to score high with not really impactful measures. So I think it goes back to the heart and the intention of a design and the operations of the building. Are there concrete measurements and performances to not only satisfy a label, but really go back to the core of the building performances? Its energy usage, its water usage, its recyclable percentage. Are there ways to engage and educate your occupants to involve in this? So I think the important part about property development is once the building is in place, it will be around for 30 years. So beyond just looking to satisfy the immediate green building standard, are there ways that you can build in to make sure that the remaining 30 years of operations will be optimum? And so I think those are the important points to consider.
Thank you. Jean-Marc, would you like to add to that?
I think I don't know much about the building standards in other areas, but I have looked at in Hong Kong, and the situation is this: it's something that it absolutely needs to change here. And what has to happen is pretty much the developers need to have a little bit less say in how things get done here. So we need to build buildings not solely for maximizing to the tiniest fraction of a penny, getting money out of these buildings, to actually looking at how do we make these things energy efficient and how do we make them compatible with environmental standards. So yes, we need new buildings, and we need to move away from the way things have been done for the past 30, 40 years. Retrofitting in old buildings is much more difficult, I think, because of the way the occupancy and tenancies are set up but that's something that has to be worked on as well. But I think with new buildings, it's without a doubt, we need to really take this, it has to be done in a much different way. But yeah, it's not my particular area that I focus on, but I do know that things need to change, and there needs to be stronger regulation and a lot of pushback on property developers in Hong Kong. They have way too much power.
Thank you. It's a very clear message. We have just about, I think, time for one more question, which looks as if it's directed at Jens. PMI as a target to have all operations climate neutral by 2030. Any specific examples to illustrate this point? Is there something you can elaborate upon. This is from Jason Chinwankwo.
Sure. Thanks for the question. Our first factory to become climate neutral was in Lithuania at the end of last year. As a result of a number of actions, first to reduce the energy usage, then to also retrofit heating by using biomass, and then doing a number of other measures such as sourcing green electricity and green fuel. And then there was only like a remaining 1% that could not be further greened, for which we bought offset, but there's only 1%, it's the last one. So that was the first one. We have another one that will become carbon neutral, climate neutral this year. And across our operations, we're installing gradually a number of projects, and I mentioned so in Indonesia we installed solar panels. Just last year we installed solar panels in the Philippines, which generate more than 3,000 megawatt hours per year. That's quite significant. So it's really a group-wide program, a strong program across our operations to reach this target. It's a very ambitious target, we know. In some cases, we're not exactly sure how we will get there, but I think we need ambitious targets to drive also innovation, creativity, and find new solutions.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jens, and thank you to all the panelists and to Alexandra for moderating the great panel. Really good discussion. And thank you, everybody, for watching.